Hello, everyone. Hello, Jenny.
Hi, Laurie.
We're here again for another in our MoonLore series. Today, we are going to be talking about the new moon that happens on December 14th. This is a really important new moon. What's special about this new moon, Jenny?
It's not only a new moon and our last new moon of the year, but it's also a solar eclipse. It's a
Yes.
pretty powerful one.
Yeah,
So it is
it really is. And I think I'm glad you brought up the fact that it's the last new moon of 2020, because this year has been sort of interesting in how it's kind of contained
on.
within certain cycles astrologically. And given that the year is a man-made thing, it's interesting that the universal cycles have kind of lined up. We'll get a little more into that as we go. But it's the last new moon of the year. It's in Sagittarius. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But for now, let's just think about what is a new moon. You know, all of the planetary pairs make these different cycles, and the cycle between the sun and the moon is sort of the one we model the other cycles after, because it's a cycle that we can see so clearly just by going outside at night and watching how it changes. At the new moon is when, if we go out at night on the new moon, what are we going to see? Nothing. It's dark. It's totally dark, because the moon is between us and the sun, so we don't see it. It's a very dark night. We think of these cycles as the new moon is the beginning of the series, the beginning of the cycle. It's the time when the sun and the moon come together. So we think of it, as the time to plant a seed, to start a process. Anytime the starting of a process happens when the previous cycle ends. So the new moon is not only the beginning of one cycle, it's the ending of the previous cycle. So you can think of the new moon as the start of the cycle that then grows up until the full moon 2 weeks later, and then drops back down to the next new moon a month later. So that's kind of the cycle of the lunar phases. So what's next, Jenny?
Next part of this is probably to talk a little bit more about the Sagittarius aspect of this moon. New moon is Sagittarius. It's always Sagittarius this time of year, so
Right.
It's always bringing that symbolism in. And at the new moon phase, Sagittarius is like the archer. It's the wisdom or the expansive vision. Those are some of the things you can think about, or the archetype of the explorer or the philosopher or the gypsy, or these are all these kinds of things that we think when we think Sagittarius. It's a fire sign. It's a mutable fire. So I tend to think of it as, in real terms, it's the coals in your fire that are burned down, and they might not look like they're that bright, but if you blow on them, they will come right back up, right back to life. So I think it's a pretty good way to think about Sagittarius. I don't know, and Sagittarius has that really jovial aspect. It's humor, it's levity, and I really think it's this like bright spark in the dark winter as we're coming into the winter solstice, and it's such a necessary thing to have a time to kind of hang out with your pals and have some laughter and some jokes. Which we all have to do online, but
right. It's funny. It made me think when you said that about jovial and your friends. I always think of the Sagittarius, the kind of split screen I think of with Sagittarius. On the one hand, it's about seeking enlightenment, about seeking the bigger picture of high level of understanding. And on the other side is that just wanting to go to the party and have a good time, and kind of having that balance. And I also really like that you point out, which seems obvious to those of us who study astrology all the time, but I remember it being kind of a new awareness to me at one time when I was really young, is that the new moon is, of course, in Sagittarius, because we're in Sagittarius season. The new moon is always in the same sign as the sun is in at that time. And that's, yeah, it seems obvious because it is when the sun and the moon are lined up, but it's something to pay attention to. If you know, in August, the new moon is going to be in Leo. In December, the new moon is going to be in Sagittarius. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and it really tracks the pattern of the year. So Sagittarius is very much a response to Scorpio.
Right.
And having to be in those deep, dark places. And then Sagittarius brings some illumination, some lightheartedness to something that's really dark. But it's still close to that sign. And then on the other side of it, you have Capricorn, which is a seriousness that emerges out of the levity of Sagittarius. So it really is kind of sandwiched between these two pretty more serious and intense type of signs. And so it's that spark we get in the middle. Yeah.
Okay.
Should we look at the chart?
Yeah, why don't we pull up the chart and
Okay.
see what we've got? It's an interesting one for sure. Okay, here we have. Okay. So what we're looking at here is,
Okay.
whoops, let me see if I can open this.
And we have, so you can see the sun moon
Right.
conjunction right here at the top, 23 degrees. This is, the East Coast chart of the United States. So just to put that out there, it's going to be a little bit different or a lot different depending on what part of the world you're in. But the planets will be the same. So what's the strongest thing we see is, first of all,
Wow.
you have the sun moon conjunction, and it also includes Mercury in that mix. Mercury's close enough to it to be part and parcel of it.
Right. Right. So what does that tell us right there about how our mental processes and how our, need to communicate and what we're thinking about is so wrapped up in that symbol?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it definitely has come to my attention that because the nodal axis is in Gemini and Sagittarius, that so many of our lunations have been about communication on some level or another. And that just brings that in. It's just like, so this importance of talking to one another, or of communicating
and listening.
Thoughts. Yeah. And listening is, yeah.
I think that's really important. And, the reason we have an eclipse is because it's close to the nodal axis. That's where you're going to see eclipses, is when the new moon and the full moon are lined up close with the nodal axis.
Yeah. The other thing is, you'll notice when you look at this aspect grid, you see a lot of symbols that are the same. So just these three symbols are the moon, sun, and Mercury all together. And you move down the chart here, you see it has a trine to Mars. So that just means that the energy of Mars is very easy for the sun and moon to access. So on one hand, that can mean it's really easy to access that storytelling, fun-loving energy, but it also can be easy to access too much of that intensity and have anger and those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah, Mars is in Aries, so you're not going to expect at this new moon to have subtle conversations.
That's right.
People are going to be speaking their mind very directly with that. And yet, if you then bring in the fact that Neptune squares that, they may be speaking their mind very directly, very loudly, very assertively, like they know exactly what they're talking about, but there's this level of confusion involved. This really, to me, there's something in this about the conspiracy theory stuff. People are ready to just throw out these wild theories that have no basis in reality. And I think that's really very clear in that chart.
Yeah. The other thing I thought of was that while this person is talking to you, they're also drunk, because Neptune's there. So I totally thought about the loud person who's they're all at the party about stuff, and you're like, you need to chill out.
There you've got the conspiracy theories. A lot of drunk people saying things that are not well thought out.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Neptune, you want to with Neptune, I always think about that. What is it? Things are not as they appear to be.
Oh yeah, that, yeah.
You know, it may seem like some information may be so clear to you,
Mm,
but do some really thoughtful processing before you assume,
yeah,
because things are not as they appear to be. And that's
yeah.
not only the other guy, but look in the mirror.
Hmm.
What are any one of us spouting out as though we know, when things are not necessarily as they appear to be?
Yeah. Well, I keep thinking with that North Node in Gemini that we've had for a while now, it's just this requirement about get straight with your facts, like get into what's the logic and the reason say, like the more on
Yeah.
that level, like having to have a reckoning with those, and then wrestle with the South Node and Sagittarius, like the bringing the wisdom, like you got to have the grounding in the facts, and like, yeah,
You
and
know
then
what this makes me think of? And this might be totally off topic, but I really want to say it, so I'm going to.
say it.
Um, well, I don't know. I was researching or looking at some, I don't know, I was lost on the internet recently within the last few days. And I came across this astrology website that was saying things that seemed really odd to me. So my response was, okay, who's writing this? I could not, it was impossible to find any person attached. And this was like a big fancy website with all the bells and whistles, but you could not find who was behind the writing.
Mm,
And I think that's, we got to get clear, not only about the facts, but yeah, where's that information coming from?
mhm,
Make sure you're not absorbing some storyline, and because the website you read it on has all the bells and whistles, you're going to assume that's correct. Well, who wrote it? What's
mhm.
behind it? And I think with all the talk about fake news, we need to know who's writing what we are absorbing and assuming is correct.
Mhm.
Hmm,
Yeah, it's a
interesting.
good point. So I think the next thing I think we probably want to talk about here is, since you brought in the nodal axis, is you could see that it's pretty close to the nodal axis. So the sun and the moon are at 23 degrees, the nodal axis is at 19. So what that says to us is this is how you see the eclipse, because the fact that it's close to the nodal axis is what makes it the eclipse. Um, and so what we have, bringing in the whole solar eclipse thing. So during a solar eclipse, the sun is being blocked by the moon from our point of view. So the moon is between us and the sun. And it has, like on a soul level, it sort of indicates the blocking of the major light, which is just something to think about. But what it kind of does to this new lunation is, instead of just being this brand new spanking new moon where you just plant a seed, it kind of brings in, there's like a hangover from the darker phase of the
Right.
cycle. Like it's almost like you're still in the balsamic phase, in a sense, like in the darkest phase of the moon. And you still have to contend with that. And I think Laurie was saying, you were saying before about how it's almost like we have to pay more attention to the compost that's in the soil before we can really plant that new seed. And
Right.
um, I was reading
Yeah.
elsewhere that there was just some pieces about like having to close doors that have stayed open for too long, rather than being like, hey, I'm just going to open up this new door. It's like, well, hold on, why don't you
Yeah.
take stock and think about what doors you might need to close before you can open that new door.
I think that's really, really important. Yeah, I really like that, because generally speaking, with the new moon, we're so busy thinking about planting the new seed. What are we going to start now? And I think that's really brilliant, Jenny. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you kind of brought that part into the conversation, that the eclipse is what really brings in that suggestion of there's something to do before. Yeah, clean up that compost. Make
Yeah.
sure your compost is good and healthy before you plant that seed.
Yeah, because if you just think
Ah,
about the year we've all had, and
oh my
we're coming
gosh.
to the final, few weeks of the year, like, and we can all, it's just like a little bit of a collective sigh of relief. And so it is like you do need to look back and have a review. Having the last new moon of the year be an eclipse is a chance to review that year and think about what doors I think we all collectively would like to see close, but in your personal life too. To take, and then it's quite a finish of the year too. We were talking about earlier. It's like there's a lot going on in the last couple weeks of December, all the way up until New Year's Eve. We have significations going on, and we really will wake up to a brand new year on January 1st.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing how that happens.
Yeah.
So following the new moon, the next thing that the moon does is touch off these planets that we've been affectionately calling the COVID cluster. So it touches off Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn within those few days. Let's see.
And then a week later.
Well, actually, it's not even that. It's like, because the moon hits Pluto on the 16th, 2 days after, and then it hits Jupiter on the 17th. It does not hit Saturn until after Saturn has entered Aquarius.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't, because on the 17th, Saturn enters Aquarius, and the moon touches on it right after the moon enters Aquarius. So the thing that's amazing is these three planets first came together right at the beginning of 2020. And here in this week, these two are escaping for good. They're done with it. It's like, sorry, COVID cluster, we are out of here. We are done with this 2020. That's pretty good news, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we're all ready for the switch over. And I mean, I think it's there will be a switch in energy, and it's going to be a new paradigm. It's not going to be, there's new things to contend with, new things to work with, but it is a shift away from that really intense focus in Capricorn we've had all year.
I mean, Saturn's been in Capricorn basically for 3 years. Jupiter's been in Capricorn for a year. So for them both to move out within 2 days of each other into Aquarius, which is the sign of humanitarianism and really taking care of each other, instead of this kind of more, and I don't want to say anything bad about Capricorn, because Capricorn is a necessary energy, but it has a dark side that can be very
authoritarian,
very self-absorbed with business, and it's a hard sign unless it's used with high integrity. And I think a lot of this struggle through this year is probably helping us really look at the other side of integrity. You know, what happens when we throw integrity to the wind and just focus on making money and all that more negative side of Capricorn? What happens? Well, look where we are.
Yeah, and I also think too with I think that more environmental causes will come more to the front. And though even calling it environmental causes, it's sort of a misnomer, because this is our planet and we all live on it. So it's really our home. So it's bigger than just, it's not out there. It's all part and parcel of what we're dealing with. But I really see that. I've been watching a little bit of David Attenborough's series that's a really amazing series, but it's kind of made me think of that. So Aquarius is also that sign that I think brings in thinking about other pieces, not just humans, but animals and other entities, and being able to think bigger and having a higher vantage point than being in the trenches of Capricorn. So
Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius is definitely going to feel very, very different.
So I think the final piece to our video here is just for each of you to think about where Sagittarius falls in your chart. And you can know that if you know your rising sign, then you can figure out where Sagittarius falls.
So start here. You know, if you've got your chart in front of you in whole sign houses, just start at the ascendant, whatever sign it is, and go around the outside until you find Sagittarius. And it's in that house that this eclipse is happening. So it's in that house where you're going to want to make sure your compost is well drained and well taken care of and ready for the seed that is about to be planted.
Yeah, and I can't help it. So this chart is the chart of the East Coast, so Washington, D.C. And so we have, this chart has it in its 10th house of career, which is where everything shows up. And I mean, you can't, you go right to the president.
Right.
I mean, that's the head of state in this country. So the highest vocational position in the land. And so what needs to be closed in this area? So if you have Pisces rising, your question might be closing a door in the area of your profession or your vocation or something that you need to kind of have closure on before you can start something new. Where's it fall for you, Laurie?
Oh boy, I don't know what this, I've got to really give some thought to this for me, because this is it's in my 4th house. Sagittarius is in my 4th house. The eclipse, the nodal axis is exactly, the eclipse is exactly on my north node.
Well, that's a pivot point.
It's a pivot point. It's exactly on my north node, and it's exactly on my partner's descendant. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's time for me to seriously clean up my apartment and get ready to move.
Yeah,
maybe my
future.
I can't imagine. I really can't. But it certainly does give me pause to think about what this new day is going to bring, for sure. How about you, Jenny?
I have Sagittarius in the 6th house. So I think about needing to close doors on some unhealthy habits. Maybe just taking a look at.
You have unhealthy habits?
1 or 2, maybe.
I don't believe it.
Yeah, I think what I really think about is I think so much about the 6th house of self-improvement and routines. And I just think changing routines about how I do work is huge, because I have 2 businesses, and more and more focusing on the astrology business. And part of that is writing, and establishing a really good writing pattern and schedule is kind of what I think of. But some, other things too, just around eating and how I interact with people. So yeah.
Cool. And the other thing, while you're all looking at your charts and thinking about where this falls, remember, look at where Aquarius is in your chart too, because that's a lot of the focus in your life has probably been over the last few years in the house that holds Capricorn. And a lot of that focus is going to be shifting into the next house, the house that holds Aquarius. So look at Aquarius and think, wow, there's a new day starting there as well. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. I'm going to put that away, and
thank
you, everybody.
I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks for the full moon. We'll see what that brings.